Hello and welcome to Top Story. Jubilation in Kosovo on Sunday after the Kosovo Parliament unanimously approved a declaration of independence from Serbia. Huge crowds filled the streets of the capital Pristina, many of them waving American as well as Kosovo and Albanian flags. The United States was the driving force behind the NATO bombing campaign of 1999 against the Yugoslav regime of Slobodan Milosevic that paved the way for Sunday's declaration. The US and a number of European countries are expected to recognize Kosovo later today. But Serbia's Prime Minister Vojislav Koštunica accused Washington of violating the international order by creating a false state and insisted that Kosovo remained part of Serbia. Russia, too, condemned the move as immoral and illegal and called for an emergency session of the UN Security Council. There are fears that the tensions between the Serbian minority in Kosovo and ethnic Albanians, who make up some 90% of the population, could explode into violence. Well, joining me now to discuss the dangers that lie ahead is Jacques Rupnik, a political scientist and historian at Sciences Po here in Paris, and a frequent writer on the Balkans. Thanks very much for being on Top Story. What is likely to happen next? Many people are saying this is opening a Pandora's box, not just in Kosovo, but throughout the Balkans.
Obviously, this is the first concern. Will there be violence, and will it have an effect on the region? Well, first one should say that all the neighbors of Kosovo have no problems with independence except for Serbia. So really the key question is Serbia. And we have seen that the northern enclave of Mitrovica, where most of the Serbs are living in Kosovo, are talking of their own parliament, which could, this is a hypothesis, declare its secession from Kosovo. So you have a newly independent state that would have an enclave seceding from it and demanding its connection to Serbia, which de facto already exists. And that would be the precedent, not really the independence of Kosovo, but the fact that you could have ethnic partition of Kosovo. You have neighboring Macedonia. 25% of its citizens are Albanians.
And on the face of it, it would be very difficult for the EU, at least, to argue against, at least on legal grounds, having recognized the independence of Kosovo.
Well, this is it. You know, once you enter the partition logic, there's always smaller and smaller units. I suppose the international community would only accept this if it were mutually agreed, if the Serbs and the Kosovars agreed to disagree. That is, we couldn't accept independence of Kosovo. You don't want to go back to Serbia. Well, partition is an agreed solution. If that were the case, that would be acceptable. But this is not the case. This is only would be a unilateral secession by Serbia, and that could have effects, as I said, on Macedonia, on the Albanians of Macedonia, who could want to separate, or it could have effects on the Serbs in Bosnia. This is another precedent. We see the leader of the Serbs in Bosnia calling for partition of Kosovo already now, suggesting if we could get partition on Kosovo, well, maybe we could then partition Bosnia.
So real dangers there.
These are the dangers.
What about within Kosovo itself? What about the dangers of violence between the Serb and ethnic Albanian communities in Kosovo? Because there has been recent violence. In 2004, NATO was severely criticized for its failure to stop it quickly enough.
Yeah, well, I think this time everybody's on their guard. Both NATO, the EU has deployed its police force. I think obviously we are living a very unique moment, a birth of a state. There is a clash of emotions there. Euphoria, sense of great achievement on the part of the Albanians in Kosovo, 90% of the population. Sense of fear and frustration on the part of the Kosovo Serbs. When politics is being set in a context of such high emotional drive, well, anything can happen. So this is one risk. The second one is you cannot exclude the Serbian authorities fostering or fomenting some troubles. It's not too difficult. You cannot exclude extremist nationalist Albanians getting into that logic. At this point, who would benefit from such violence? I would say only Belgrade propaganda who would say, you wanted an independent state? Look at it. It turns into violence, ethnic cleansing, and that only proves our point that this was a dangerous game. But, of course, once you start the logic of violence, you don't know where it ends. And this is, I think, everybody's fear. This is why NATO and the European Union are there to, so to speak, keep the lid on.
You mentioned the EU and keeping the lid on. The EU is going to have real, or potentially at least, could have big problems in the Balkans in the future, depending on what the relationship turns out to be between Serbia and the EU. How do you see that developing?
Well, I think that what we've seen is something totally unexpected. We thought until now that EU's attraction, the transformative power of the EU, would work for the Balkans the way it has worked elsewhere. And now we see for the first time the Serbs saying, well, if we have to choose between Kosovo and the EU, we choose Kosovo. And the Serbian Prime Minister says openly, if the EU country recognize Kosovo, we will stop EU process of integration. We don't want the stabilization and association agreement that you propose to us.
So it means loss of Kosovo.
Yeah, this is what I would call nationalism of the Groucho Marx tendency. I wouldn't join a club that would have me as a member. So this is now an entirely new situation. Self-marginalization of Serbia.
And self-marginalization, you say, but they do have the support of Russia, which is saying that there's no basis under the terms of Resolution 1244 for recognition of Kosovo's independence. They do have a point, don't they?
I think in legal terms, they do have a point. I mean, the resolution clearly says that, there should be autonomy. But the Russian argument is 1244 is autonomy within Serbia. The actual phrase is autonomy within Yugoslavia, and Serbia is a successor state of Yugoslavia. Well, the argument of Western countries would be Yugoslavia no longer exists. It has disintegrated. The last country to secede was Montenegro 2 years ago, the closest ally of Serbia. Well, all the Slavs have left. You will keep the only non-Slavs, the Albanians, in a tete-a-tete with the Serbs. That's not really a viable proposition after all we went through in the 1990s under Milosevic. So on one hand, you have a strong legal case on the part of the Russians, and then you have the reality principle that is defended by the Europeans and the Americans. And you can be politically right and legally wrong.
Okay, thanks very much. That's all we have time for today. Thanks to our guest, Jacques Rupnik of Sciences Po here in Paris. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.